Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're watching us, and welcome to this quick talk, on this case on inclusion and diversity. Today on the agenda, we have Mariana Brilhante as a keynote speaker for today, and we're going to have a conversation on inclusion and diversity. Then we'll follow up with a 15 minutes Q&A, so make sure, depending on the platform that you're using, to use the chat and send us questions, and the team will forward them to me. And to finalize, we'll look at some software solutions that can help us enable inclusion diversity, in this case in HR solutions. So let's just jump in and welcome Mariana and to join us and accepting being a part of this quick talk. Mariana is the co-founder of Diversity and Inclusion Journey, which is a social enterprise that helps organizations drive positive change in their culture and create diverse and inclusive environments. We're increasing employee sense of belonging, and we hope to also lead to better outcomes. So Mariana, thank you so much for joining us. And let's just kick off. I know people are still logging in wherever you are. So let's start with the concept that brings us today. Inclusion and diversity has been a topic or a hot topic in the last few years in HR, but it has played a role in the last couple of years. What are we talking about? What is the key points? And it's curious that even your name of your company is diversity and inclusion. Can we just separate both and understand a little what's more of inclusion side and what's more on the diverse side?
Yes, of course, Hugo. Thank you so much for inviting us to be here today. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. As Hugo mentioned, my name is Mariana Brilhante. I'm the co-founder of Diversity and Inclusion Journey. And as Hugo mentioned, there are two concepts that are normally brought up together, but they have different meanings. So when we talk about diversity, we talk about the heterogeneity of identities. So we talk about different characteristics that form our person, ourselves as individuals. We can talk about ethnicity, nationality, gender identity, ability. And when we talk about inclusion, it refers to the sense of our identities being respected and being valued. Normally, when we talk about it, it's related to our workplace. So a lot of times we use both terms. What we believe is that we cannot work on diversity without bringing inclusion to the table, because you can only bring out the true value of diversity if everyone feels that their opinions are valued and respected.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I had was exactly that. That sometimes when we read and we always, even the way that the name is spelled out, diversity, equity, sometimes they put equity in the middle, and then inclusion. Aren't we doing on the wrong order? Meaning, should we be worrying about diversity after only inclusion? Meaning, inclusion should drive diversity and not the other way around? Or I'm getting it on the wrong side.
No, we believe that you're right. Like if we are working in diversity without having a sense of inclusion in the workplace, it can really backfire. So like there's an author, I can't remember her name, but she talks about like the Noah Ark. So if you're worried about having two people with different characteristics of everyone, and you're not working on the teams and the awareness and the processes and structural forms that the company has to make sure that these people are valued, or everyone is valued and their opinions are taken into account when inside of the company, then it can really backfire the efforts to bring diversity, because people will not feel that they are there because they are exceptional at what they do, but they feel that they are there to fill a name that the company wants to prioritize.
Right, the gap. as HR departments and organizations, what types of practice and implementation policies are you seeing? Maybe give us a little of your experience in terms of retrospective, how things are evolving, and where we are right now. And I know that we've met before in previous events that one of the things that I think you're doing great is to promote it and to ensure that sometimes it's small steps. It's not like you don't have to go all the way to start the wheel moving. What do you see in terms of the market? How the evolution is coming along, and what are probably the new trends or movements that we should be looking at?
Yeah, it separates the question into parts. I think in the US, it's a topic that it has started in the 60s. So it started a little bit with the anti-discrimination legislation, and it has moved from there. But it has taken a little bit of a more in-depth effort over the past few years. A few movements have made this a topic that is urgent inside of the organization. So you have the Me Too movement,
Black Lives
exactly.
Matters, LGBTQ.
So you have those movements that have helped to push the agenda inside of companies, because we spend most of our time at work, and you cannot really separate your personal life and your professional life. So something that means that is important for me in a personal level and may have an impact on my professional life cannot be obscured by companies. And this started to be working more on a level of maybe marketing and advertising, where companies looked for more representation from different identities. But nowadays, that is not that cannot be the only step that companies take. So what we see today is that diversity and inclusion, it's a little bit like the path to sustainability. It used to be an office that it was serving and maybe working not against, but maybe not working together with the bottom line of the business. But nowadays, diversity and inclusion needs to be part of the value chain. So you cannot look at diversity and equity and inclusion just as help in certain ways. It needs to be attached to the business model of the company, and this means that you need to look at your suppliers, and we have a lot of companies doing that. IKEA, for example, it's a great example. It's a company that already demands their suppliers not to have like amazing practices in diversity and inclusion, but to look at it and to respond on them. And then you have the way that recruitment works. So recruitment is a fundamental part of the company, and it starts the whole process of including people. And if you're not looking at ways to bring diverse people, and if you're, for example, only hiring people from the specific universities, or if you're demanding specific characteristics that are not work related or task oriented, you're excluding a big chunk of the market. So nowadays, the recruitment process needs to be more open, and HR departments need to be more creative where they are going to get their employees. And also on terms of products, when we talk about inclusivity, we need to understand if our products are being served. They can serve everyone, and they can serve an entire population, or if they are catered to specific population. And obviously, representation on advertising and on communication using inclusive language needs to be part of the company as well. So I think those are the big changes. Like the big changes from something that is just talk about it and being external and showing off, and now it needs to be really part of the business and the way that you make business.
Yeah. In regard to the recruitment, we actually at the end, that demo portion that we just mentioned. It's about recruitment software and how they can enable you or help you in terms of inclusion and diversity and address some of the concerns that you have. So stay tuned for that last part. One of the questions that I also have for you is, what are you're implementing in organizations and doing consultant work in different organizations. What is, because I mean, diversity sometimes it's, I wouldn't say easy, but at least you can measure it more or less, right? While inclusion, although you can measure it, you know, there's polls, there are dials, there's other notes that you can use or tools that you can use to evaluate, but it's a little harder, right? When you're talking about diversity, you can try to, you know, look at your population, look at the population inside of a company, outside of a company, and in your suppliers, your customers, and try to understand if you're having that representation or not. So I think people, at least that I speak with, either HR persons that do have that concern of, okay, you know, it's easier to get diversity dashboards and information for your clients and customers, even though this is going to be generic. Of course, every company is at a different stage. What has been, or at least what you feel has been the main, for one side, the barriers, and for the second part, where they struggle the most to have that incorporation of value inside of the chain of the process, like ensuring that if I want to have better outcomes, I'll for sure have to have principles of inclusion and diversity inside of my company. So for the companies in the project that you've been implementing, what have been the major barriers that you identify depending on the stage where the companies are?
Well, the main barriers, we have different stakeholders. So looking at the different stakeholders, we have one of the main barriers that will not move forward diversity and inclusion is the buy-in from the leadership. So it depends. You have different sources of pressure to have that buy-in. So the buy-in from the leadership is one of the main points that would be a challenge for companies. Then we have the trust of employees, because DEI has been on top of mind for a long time. We have a lot of conversations about it, and sometimes employees feel that nothing is being done. So we talk about it, we bring some people to talk about it, but then actual structural changes are not being accomplished inside of the companies. And
you feel that those are true, or is it like sometimes people always feel underrepresented, no matter how many you know, training sessions or changes in process? You know, sometimes you have that difficulty of seeing, oh, I see that they're doing, for example, let's say generational or aging. So we see like employees that are past employees that are, you know, they retire or something. There are, you know, there's all these events for retired past employees, but none for active or mentoring for the new trainees, for example. You know, is it that the case, or is really that it's not really translating into the reality of processes on a daily basis? So you don't actually feel it.
I think that links to the other challenge, which is having initiatives that really tackle the challenges of the company. So we call ourselves diversity and inclusion journey because each company starts in a different stage. Probably many companies have already initiatives that are directed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, even though they don't necessarily name themselves like that. What happens is when you have an assessment of the state of the art of the company and you ask employees how they feel. Inclusion is difficult to measure, but it's possible to measure. So when you ask how they feel, and when you measure the hard data from HR, like promotions, salary gap, retention rates, and you have that combined data, you understand where are the gaps of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when you are transparent throughout the process, obviously, like maybe it's not interesting for the company to share everything with employees, and that's okay. But when you share where you want to be and why are you doing what you're doing, so if the company, for example, let's imagine it's a tech company, they want to attract more women, but they realized throughout the survey that women feel that there's a language that is a little bit sexist. Maybe we need to work on that, because we cannot want to hire more women if we know that the environment or the language that is used inside of the company is making them feel uncomfortable. And when you have that input, those different inputs from where we are in terms of HR hard metrics that it's very easy to access, and the sense of employees, then you can have a source of information that will inform the initiatives. And those initiatives will be obviously according to the goals, the business goals of the company, but they will be targeted. And that is easier to explain to employees, and it will have a much less probability uh, of being called out by employees, even though you cannot make everyone happy, and that's also something that we need to realize.
Right, to keep that in mind. Let me take the goal part that you just mentioned, which I think, at least with talking with the C-suite, is something that we face constantly, right? What's there is the part that do the good, of course, but what does that translate into actual results? And I think that's something that we need to, in a way, is mystified, or at least to ensure and give us also your perspective from the projects that you've implementing. What are actually the results oriented that we can get from having a more inclusive and diverse team?
Well, several studies have shown that diversity and inclusion, when worked together, have a positive impact on the business. So more, it's a little bit more difficult to track the casuality, but it's several studies from McKinsey show that if you have representation of women or different cultures in your board, that the company has a higher probability of making profit. Also, several studies show that if you have a diverse and inclusive company, that your decisions will be quicker and better business decisions. So obviously, this is not so straightforward to measure, but the data has been shown and proven over and over that this is happening in companies that bet in diversity and inclusion. And then obviously, we need to look at each company individually. So if your goal is to work in technology and to have different products or products to serve different communities, if you have those communities inside of the company, the probability of having a solution that is open to everyone, it's much higher. So I would say that to end the train of thought, the last point is employees. We are seeing that it's a difficult time to hire new people. And time again, it has been shown. Actually, there's a study that just came out that shows that more than 4 in 5 people will consider leaving the company if the company doesn't bet on an inclusive environment. And 70% of employees, when they have an inclusive manager, they have 70% less probability of having a burnout. So in practical terms, if you, for example, account that people will have one less day of skipping work because of mental health per year in a company that has 1,000 employees, this is measurable. So you have 1,000 days that are saved from people not going to work. So those are all measurable in the terms of the positive impact. And then we need to look at each company in specific. So if you're in oil and gas, you will need to tackle your needs for oil and gas and measure what are the key metrics for your business. So probably you will focus maybe in gender equality, because it's something that is a challenge on the oil and gas industry, as well as on the technology industry. If you're
Right.
working on the health sector, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and it's probably the opposite. I was just reading a study this morning. Well, Financial Times also just mentioned yesterday the inclusion diversity results of a few companies, but I was actually reading a study that some universities in the U.S. they're actually getting quotas or for men to ensure that they have enough men on these courses or on college to ensure that they are diverse and they're which we thought it was on the right direction. But as you mentioned, health is a great example of that, where men are subrepresented in some groups, not in all. But you mentioned another point that I want to explore a little more, which is the management role in it. Is it that we are what do you think of the role of management in this aspect of inclusion and diversity? Is it because we normally when you talk about inclusion, we always think about inclusion as employees, and of course managers play a major role in it. What have you seen in the field and observe, and what are the main challenges that managers have? Is it just unconscious bias towards recruitment or towards performance appraisal or other things or promotions? Um, is it that it's something that it still need on that level of managers, or is it that we are currently bypassing managers and HR going in straight in directly as a company as overall? What is the role of managers and what do you think of those?
So to start, I truly believe that diversity and inclusion needs to be a decision top down. That doesn't mean that the initiative needs to be top down, but we need to have the buy-in and the leadership to not only talk the walk, but walk the talk. So if you have a CEO or C-suite that talk about diversity and inclusion, but they are not available to do the trainings, for example, when they are open to the entire teams, or if they don't allocate the right resources, so human resources, financial resources, and time, you can see that this is not a priority. So that would be the first step. And then it needs to come from a place from awareness. I'm generalizing, so I know that I'm putting myself in a tough position, but like normally the top leadership are people who come from a certain level of privilege. I'm not saying that they didn't work hard to get where they are. They worked probably very hard to get where they are, but it's difficult sometimes to connect with the challenges of diverse people. So that means also being curious and understanding what is that are the needs of the different characteristics of people, and showing. And I truly believe that walking the talk is one of the biggest points. And then what you mentioned, like being aware, like I'm aware that it's not because I work on diversity, equity, and inclusion that I don't have bias. Like I have bias like everyone else, and I need to check and put the processes in place to make sure that this does not affect the business decisions. So I would say those are the two starting points.
One of the things that at least I speaking with the community of HR leaders is that it looks like we're in an era also of similar to the environment, same thing. It's as you were mentioning at the beginning, it's not a must have now. It's a or a nice to have now. It's a must to have. But we are constantly afraid of implementing and making the wrong decisions or making the wrong choices. We've sometimes like Portuguese, we're both Portuguese. We have male and female on the language itself. So making sure to address the persons in the right way, or if you're in a different culture, ensuring. I remember when I was in China for the first time, and to make sure that you present the card in a certain way to make sure that you're following the cultural of that country, or other aspects of being in a meeting in Jamaica, that you pray before you're eating a meal, and if you're not a religious person, you're part of it while not wanting to be a part of it at the same time. Are we living in we're living in cancellation culture right now? Like everything that you say can be interpreted in 300 ways. And what would you say for the persons who are want to tackle the issue, but at the same time are very much afraid of making wrong choices? Saying the incorrect way, and if it can be how to tackle, how to revolve around it, and try to make it right again, basically. Because I think everyone is a little sometimes confused in terms of what do I need to say, if I'm misplacing anything on either gender or well, generational as well.
Yeah, I think
What is your advice on this?
that's a tough spot, because when we have uncomfortable conversations, we can make mistakes, and that's okay. Um, one of the key things, it's what we were talking about before. If diversity, equity, and inclusion needs to be a decision that it's coming from the top, then the initiatives and understanding how to implement it can be from the bottom as well. And that means that asking people is probably the most straightforward and easy way of understanding how can we do it. So there are a lot of initiatives that companies can do. Like one of the key things would be to start a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, which is not the department that is needs to implement the initiatives, but can advise. And that should be representing the company, should have the representation from the different diverse members of the company. And that can help to understand on a strategic level how the company can move forward. And also, one of the most um, amazing and impactful initiatives that the companies can make, which is very simple. It's employee resource groups, or employee networks, however we want to call it, are groups of people who share one characteristic, and that they can discuss how that characteristic affects their progression at work, and they can help each other. But also, it's a very good way to link the needs of that group to the decision makers inside of the company. So it's a way to support, to advance this group on a professional level, but also to inform the company on what can the company change on a structural level or on a behavioral level that the group can advance. Just an example that I'm thinking of, like the network of the LGBTQI plus from Microsoft. They in the US in the 70s and 80s, they were the ones that managed to get the company to have health insurance also to partners of the LGBTQI community. So that was an advancement for those people, and it was because they could inform the company of that need, and also because it was unfair that others could have and they couldn't. But maybe otherwise that wouldn't be a topic that would be raised in a strategic level, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that concept of tribes or communities is something that we've been seeing that have been created. We also started to looking at the chat and some questions that we're getting. One of them was in that direction, and maybe you can give us some more examples. Is like examples of practices or policies or cases that you think. You just mentioned the one from Microsoft, but if you have other things, I guess what's behind this question is also what can I do today? What can I start? In a baby step way. Not easy. It's not easy, but in a baby step. What type of examples have you seen that we can? Oh, I never thought about you know, because sometimes, you know, we're limiting ourselves to the examples that we know. So other examples that you can have for us that are good implementations of in the different areas as well, that would be great.
We have several ways. I come back to the survey and questionnaire because I do believe that informs well each individual company. So understanding what your employees are feeling, it's very important. I don't know who asked the question, but for example, in Portugal, you cannot collect specific data. You cannot legally make a person say, for example, what ethnicity they are, so or what part of group they are, and this is something that you can ask, obviously, on a survey that is optional and volunteer and anonymous, and that can help you understand what is the who are your employees. And then there are certain ways that you can bring the discussion to the table. So I believe that small groups, when you try to tackle, let's imagine, for example, mental health. Mental health is still a taboo in Portugal. So it's not very common that it's not accepted. Sorry, but it's not very common that you would talk like, oh, I'm going to my counselor or I'm going to see a psychologist. People would be a little bit surprised that you would mention this on a work environment. Having conversation around this and having a safe space. So people need to be that this is a safe environment and that what you're talking about is not going to have any repercussions in the way that people see you as an employee and as a person that contributes to the company. And those conversations can be obviously organized in a simple way. It can be like there's, for example, Cheryl, the former COO from Facebook. She launched the circles for women, but this can be for different groups of the company, or it can be for different topics. To have a specific goal in common and have these conversations that are more open and informal. Also, awareness. Awareness is very important because a lot of the topics are not mainstream, or even though people, for example, we celebrate on the 8th of March, the International Women's Day, and companies still do actions that are focused on more beautifying women than understanding why this date is celebrated. So let's have a conversation of what are the challenges that women have faced and why they are facing them, and bring those conversations to the table. And this can be organized around different topics. And then consulting experts. So it's normal that companies don't have experts on everything. Like, we don't consider ourselves experts. We are also on our own journey of learning more about diversity and inclusion. When we have a company talking with us about integrating people with disabilities, we look for a partner outside of our company because we are not experts on the topic and we are also on our learning journey. So surrounding yourself of organizations that work and are specific to the different characteristics you want to focus on, it's an important step. So we don't mess up as much as we would, because we will mess up sometimes, for sure.
We always been there before. We started the Q&A, so as there's a few questions coming in. There's one that asks, do you think it's possible to create these safe spaces inside the company, or in your opinion, would it be better to have outside partners that can, you know, treat this aspect?
I think both ways work. The advantage of having an external partner is that you take the pressure out of yourself from the equation. So you're offering something to your community of employees, but you're also not putting yourself on the you did right, you did wrong, because you will have someone else to moderate and maybe kick off the conversations, and then For example, if we are talking about, let's say, like one conversation every couple of months, you can have an external partner doing the first couple of conversations, and then you can pass it on when there's a certain level of security felt by the employees. You can pass it on to someone inside the community that shows interest, or you can organize it yourself. I think there are a lot of good resources online also explaining how you can do it, and you can implement yourself if you have the time and the human resources to do so. It can be both ways. I think there's pros and cons on both options.
True. They can always contact your company to do it as well. One of people keep asking for more examples. I'll just give them a few more. I can give you also one or two. I was just yesterday on the meeting with other HR leaders, and the team was also inclusion and diversity, and it was the head of HR of L'Oreal in Portugal that was talking about a few examples that they are implementing. One of them is mental health, which is you mentioned as well. So they have a person available with a schedule available for the whole company, and they're actually saying they're increasing because there are so many persons requesting having a one session, and I believe they do that generic, well, I'll say generic, but it's specific to each person, you know, where you are, where you want to go, and align that with your development career. Other examples that came through were the generational issue as well. So you have new people coming in from different generations, while at the same time you have people that are leaving your organization, and they have this mentoring programs and coach programs where they tie those two generations together. Of course, depending on the subject, that would make sense. So that's another example. What other examples can you also give us?
So those examples that you mentioned are related more with the behavior and the development of people. So I think one example that it's a little bit more hard work is looking at the processes. So understanding if your processes, for example, for the life cycle of the employee, are equal, so they give same opportunities. And I would start with the sourcing of your employees. It's very common, for example, in consulting companies in Portugal, to source people only from specific universities and the top of their class. Like if you're doing this,
we did that a couple of years ago. I remember we had the internal conversation of, and I think it was an article coming out of, at the time, I think was 𝗤𝗧𝗹𝗀𝘀𝗀𝗀, the HR VP of Google, that said, you know, we changed of looking at just, you know, MIT, or in case in Portugal, EST, which is the Superior Técnico, or Faculdade de Ciências da Universidade Nova, which was just those two main universities that give you IT people, technology people, while there's a whole other bunch of universities that also give you. So not just looking at those two, but maybe look at, let's say, the top 20% of any that will be less represented. You know, even sometimes we were doing that internally, 10 years ago or something. At the time, we decided, no, we just need to change that process.
yeah.
So we're an example of just that.
So that is on the processes side, and making sure that everyone has the same opportunities, and then understanding the different people you have working with you, and those needs that you were mentioning, like the reverse mentoring. So the mentoring from a younger person to a person who is for a longer time inside of the company, and understanding what those needs are, and pairing or giving the possibility for those people to have training. It's one possibility. And then you also have, in terms of sourcing, for example, I'm not sure what are the sectors represented here on this webinar, but we have the example of the tech industry, which is very difficult to source human resources. So we have great examples. One company, Critical Software, It's a Portuguese tech company that they have a partnership with 𝗂𝗃, which is a Danish um, social enterprise that focus on training people, autists on the spectrum of autism, to become developers, and they integrate them inside of the company. So Critical Software was the first company in Portugal to implement that project, but 𝗂𝗃 is present worldwide. So they are present in, I don't know if it's 40 countries or 50 countries, but they are present in many places. Then we have a company in Portugal that it's a grocery chain that started a center for inclusion where they have a mock-up of a store, and they train people with disabilities to work in the supermarket, and they prepare them to go to the market. So basically, they don't necessarily end up all in the same company, but they are preparing the workforce to the market. This I'm talking about diversity. When we talk about inclusion, it's the mentoring that we mentioned as well, and there's one program that we have been doing with companies, which it leads to the involvement in the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also creates team building. So it's a program that it's developed for 25 people from different areas and different hierarchies that analyze the challenges of diversity, equity, and inclusion inside of the company. They come up with solutions. And what does this mean? This means that you have 25 people that become ambassadors of the topics of diversity and inclusion, and they themselves need to have conversations to validate the problem. Exactly what you do with a product or a service. Like, they go and they understand the problem, they validate the problem, they come up with a solution, and they test the solution. So the goal is then to implement the solutions inside of the company. And you have that bottom-up approach that has higher impact because it comes from the needs of the employees, and it comes also from their own creativity and their solutions. So those are a few examples. And then you have the more traditional one, which is training. And training, it's interesting in terms of awareness and calling the right names to things. So a lot of people don't understand that, for example, we talk a lot about meritocracy, but meritocracy, as we have heard it in our lives, is not what I believe to be meritocracy. Because, for example, I'm Portuguese, I'm here speaking English, and I did nothing to learn English. Not that I did nothing, like I learned English, but my parents were able to put me in a school that focused on English. They were able to pay me summer camps in the UK. A lot of other people don't have those opportunities. So if I'm applying to a job that requires English, I'm at an advantage that other people don't have, but I did nothing to deserve this. It was not me who decided to work hard and learn English. So I didn't have to have that extra effort. So I think a lot of times the training is good to put not a training that you just talk and others listen, but have people ask themselves this question. Okay, so what is meritocracy? What is privilege? Can I be privileged in one hand and not privileged on the other? Like I'm a white woman. I have privilege because I'm white, and some areas I have less privilege because I'm a woman. So those conversations are important for people to start having with themselves.
For sure. And I think that's one of the goals of these key talks, is actually to open the debate and start having those tough conversations, let's call it. We're pretty much getting on time, and time does fly. Any final message that you want to pass on, or idea of implementing or go check your website and make sure to subscribe to one of your roundtables and be part. But leave it to you. Just a final thought before we move over to the next step.
Yes, taking your message, our goal is to advance the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's to bring the conversation and make sure that companies and specialists on the area inside of companies also have a space that they can debate ideas. So we have those round tables where we have 4 to 5 companies and share their challenges and the solutions that they implemented. So if you're interested on that, please visit our website. I'm not sure if it was written here, but someone can maybe write. I'm not sure if
we can leave it.
Okay. That's one thing, and the other thing that you mentioned, which is sometimes it's difficult because there's this. It's a sensitive topic, and we can offend people in many ways. And sometimes there's this better not do it, because if I do it wrong, it will be worse. But I think if you start having the conversations and if you do this effort of listening to the people who work with you, obviously this is a little bit more tricky if you have a company that it's 40,000 employees. But if you make the effort to listen to people and if you have different sources, interviews, focus groups, the survey, it's a great first step to give inside of the company. And having someone on your side who knows a little bit more that can help you along the way and creating awareness about the different topics.
Well, thank you, Mariana. One of the topics that we've just talked about was recruitment, where you ensure that your practices and your processes are making sure that you're going to have in the future a diverse and fit to culture and inclusion company. We do believe that as today you have to ensure that you have those processes thought out in a way to ensure that in the future you're recruiting the correct, not only making sure that you're focused orientated to the tasks and to anything that it's not relevant to getting the goals or the job done. You should be ignoring it. And we think that technology can play a role in that regards as well. So right now we have like this 10 minutes video demonstration where you can see how Quidgest software can help you in terms of recruitment and also training is the 2 products that we're showing. Some aspects and some features that can enable you to implement inclusion diversity. You're welcome to stay tuned, Mariana, and join us. And after the demo, we'll come back and then just a closing off. I'll be doing a short demo around 10 minutes where we are going to be able to see how technology can help us enable and sponsorship some DEI, some inclusion and diversity components. So how can we use our HR and people operations software to enable what we just heard on this call? So just by start to give you an overview of the solutions that we have in terms of HR, and they go from employee self-service, manager self-service for the managed components, reports and analytics, which do play a major role in the parts of diversity, also recruitment, performance, training, and then more on the core side, we have the people or the HR core module, the payroll, claims, time and attendance, and health and safety, for example, just to name a few of the different modules that compose our HR ERP solution. I'm actually going to be focusing on the recruitment and the training, although all those different modules do have an impact on all the activities that we have on inclusion and diversity. I think it will be easier just to focus on those 2 as an example, so you can take the best out of your current systems as well. So one, of course, is recruitment. And our recruitment solution is actually divided in different components. So we have the back office part of it, where we build the processes, where we have the templates, where we create and we manage the whole recruitment process. Then the job board, where where we advertise, and it can be built in also on your websites for the ads that you're placing, the job offers. And there's a component in this module that it's the e-candidate, or the self-service for the candidates, so they can apply, they can register, they can exchange messages with the recruiter, processor, or officer. It's a way of communicating with the recruitment team, and also, later down the road, do the onboarding activities as well. So the module is divided in these different components, and they can be turned on and off depending if they're needed or not. So the recruitment module is where we basically built in all the phases that we are going to use, and we can use templates to speed up the process of creating. Is where we have automatic shortlisting, which is something that we're going to be seeing that also can help with the UI, that we are not actually going in one individually. It's where we also collect all the needs of recruitment from the different organizations, either also from the manager self-service, if you want that option to be available. It's where we send all the communication, messaging, invites for interviews, emails, where we can issue automatic reports. We can also build questionnaires to send to candidates to evaluate cultural fitness along the process, along other tests or ways of evaluating the candidates. And it's where we also define the different onboarding plans and activities for the different jobs that we have available. It's where we create the ads that will then later on be showed and displayed on the job board. So the e-candidate and the job board are basically the same, but with the login option in. So when you log in and register as a candidate, all that process is built in. It's where I identify as a candidate. I can go in. There's also the GDPR in terms of Europe, in terms of data protection, that it's built in as well. It's pretty much where I input all my information in terms of my set of data. It's where I manage the process. I can send message to the different managers that I'm working in that process and receive updates. All the questionnaires and all the tests that we are applying, they can go in online as well and fill in that information as well. And then later on, when I decide when I accept the offer, it is the last stage of the process where we can basically design in an integrated workflow of tasks, of activities. We can give it, a welcome message and documentation that I need to supply or submit for the contract, is where I can basically say I've completed this task. So we can add employee manuals, frequently asked questions, training actions, contract documentation, as well as just referred. So basically track the activities from the moment that I'm a candidate to the moment that I move over to be an actual candidate, from a candidate to an employee. So in terms of inclusion, diversity enables, why recruitment softwares can help you. So for sure, they can have capabilities, and we have capabilities that enhance candidate search. And being able to go in and search for candidates while still limited some of the information that you're seeing to reduce bias can help you find your best pool of talent. So you can search for, if you have a particular recruitment process where you're lacking representation from parts of your community that you think you should be in them, that can be a way for you to search for candidates that have already registered and they're already in your database. The other thing is to try to reduce that bias process. So those type of automations of screening candidates, etc., can be options to reduce that bias that exists on these processes. Also focusing on data that it's relevant to the job specific. Making sure when you create job ads that they also can be unbiased, or they can be targeted to specific representations. We allow you to have multiple different ads for the same job advertisement, so you can actually capture more of your target audience. The process templates ensures that it's fairness, meaning one recruiter can be trying to apply different processes of templates of processes. This way we can have it more in a standardized way, pre-built in the system. Making sure that you can also build in questionnaires for fit culture, or blind assessments for screening tests, and focusing on data that it's actually relevant to the specific job that you're doing, and not necessarily for any backgrounds or any components of candidates that really don't represent future results. So for you to ensure that you will be in the future be more diverse, for example, recruitment is a key, but inclusion is also important by using the software to ensure, for example, the cultural fit with the organization. The other solution that we're seeing is the training one. So of course, training plays a key role on DOI across every aspect, and the solution allow you to diagnose training needs that can come out of performance, that can come out of previous training actions, design the whole training plan, either if it's a yearly base or if it's a multi-year training plan, if it spreads across all departments on your organizations, or if you want to have specific training plans for specific groups, and DOI can be one of them. So you can have, for inclusion, a specific training plan to kickstart your organization. Track also its implementation, who's attending, who's not attending, budget and actual cost, evaluation of performance afterwards, surveys, questionnaires that you can build into the solution as well to pass either immediately after the training or whatever period you want to predetermine them to be sent out, even for managers to see if performance change. So this is also fully incorporated with the different modules that we see as performance and core. And why is particularly the software of training it's important? So you want to ensure that the system, for example, our system allow you to have training programs that are specific to tribes, for example. And let me call it tribes as a way to organize communities around different things, around age, around gender, around religion, really doesn't matter. Also is where you can track mentoring and coach in sponsorship programs. And those play, and we know from experience that they play a real key in terms of changing the way and changing how your company is or not more inclusive and diverse. Of course, the basic one of tracking DOI training actions. So ensuring that either managers when they're doing evaluations, or the recruiters when they're recruiting, or HR, or even throughout the whole community of your employees and your suppliers. And sometimes we always focus on the inside of employees, but you also have to look on the outside as well. So for also ensuring that if I'm dealing with the suppliers of my company or my customers, that I have in mind and that I'm trained in unconscious bias and other aspects of inclusion. It's also where you can run a diagnostic or a dial or a poll. Sometimes they call it poll, sometimes call it dial, on your level of inclusion and diversity. So if you're cherished, if you're celebrated, so those type of assessments are really key for you to also have the necessary inputs to build those training actions later on. So having a possibility to do that inside of the system, I think it gives you an edge instead of going outside and having everything in the same tool. So also tracking how is the participation of the trainees on your different trainings and the results, because you also might be sending them to training actions that are outside of the scope of DOI, in their professional aspects or certifications. But you want to understand what's happening with the participants, what's happening with the trainees, what are the trainees that self-enroll in some actions comparing to other ones that don't self-enroll, for example. So you want to make sure that
you are tracking for the other trainings that are happening in your organization, that you're tracking who's attending and why they're attending and the results that they're getting. And if you're missing or if you're lacking the development of some components in different tribes. So you want to make sure that you're training or you're having in a path of acceleration or succession planning, that you're building the future generations and you're building your future employees to be on those future roles. So you want to ensure that it's diverse as well. So of course, receive feedback from this training action in terms of OKRs or KPIs of DOI, it's key. And also ensuring that you can also in the system have specific training plans for individuals. So not only having general plans throughout the organization, but ensuring that they can be as unique as possible, because that's the best way for you to ensure that you have inclusion in the processes. So this was just a brief example of some components where your HR solution and our HR solutions at Quidgest allow you to target inclusion and diversity by enabling the softwares that you already have. And we could look at the other ones, especially in terms of diversity, the dashboards and that information that gives you visualization of things that sometimes you don't know. But also throughout the different ones, like, even on the HR module, for example, making sure that you have, a gender option table, or that you have your legal name plus the name that you like to be called in. So that's something that it goes throughout the different modules. I would just focus on those two because those are, I think they're key, and give you an example what you should be also looking like. So if you're interested, if you want to know more, if you want to know how you can apply inclusion diversity when you're rebuilding your HR software solutions, we are here, we're available. You can send us in and give us a note, and we can schedule a more comprehensive demonstration of the different solutions. Thank you so much.
So thank you for staying in for the last hour. You're going to have a survey at the end, and you'll have a QR code with a link that you can download an ebook with 5 axes on HR management driven by software. As an early bird, you can download and have access to that ebook. There's also a link for scheduling any time or demo with one of our experts about one of those 2 products that we just saw. So make sure to use that optional for free as well. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, whatever you're watching us, either it's on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. The next Q Talk is happening next week on Thursday, 9th of March, 4 p.m. on GMT, 11 on East Time, and it's about GDPR, so data protection. So make sure to subscribe and go to that one as well. And see you in the next Q Talk. Thank you, everyone.